What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Simple Sports Hub, man, where we talk all things Washington Commanders football. Hey, there's some things that we got to discuss, man. There's been some breaking news, there's been some updates when it comes to our Washington Commanders and search for our defensive coordinator for the 2026 season that's up and coming. Um, there's some news that we got to discuss. Let's talk about it. All right, so here we go, man. I apologize. It's been a little while. Had to take a little break from dropping some videos, but your boy is back to give y'all some good content and just give y'all my thoughts on this current, hiring, hiatus that our Washington Commanders has been on. And well, not hiatus, but the search for our new defensive coordinator since we have fired Joe Witt. We now have our new offensive coordinator and David Blau, in-house hire. And it's been a lot of speculations. It's been a lot of guys that we didn't interviewed, and we're gonna touch bases on a little bit of those names. And I'm gonna just, here we go. Breaking news today. We found out that my number one option for a defensive coordinator, which I gave about a 3 to 5% chance of us getting landing this guy as our defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, who was heavily sought out as a head coach. Had a few, had quite a bit of head coaching interviews, but also was contract was up in Minnesota, and there was just ramblings about him returning back if he doesn't get that opportunity to be a head coach again. And we all know the speculations about him, not the speculations, but the active legal, lawsuit that he has open against the NFL, due to his time in Miami. And again, like I said, the chances of him coming to Washington very, very, very slim. And I was more on the 3% side than the 5% side of us getting and landing this type of guy. We did bring him in for an interview. So as we brought in so many others, but he has now returned back to the Minnesota Vikings, where he will be their defensive coordinator yet again. So he re-upped with them. And again, does that mean that Brian Flores won't have an opportunity to be a head coach again? Maybe after the legal issue has been settled, he might get a shot. But again, one of the biggest things that I always alluded to: what would be the reason for Brian Flores to leave a good situation, a personnel that he is already familiar with? They know his philosophy. He knows his players in and out. What will lure him away from a team like the Minnesota Vikings defense to come and coach a old veteran, USA uh, 55 and over club defense in the Washington Commanders? Like, why would he leave that young, productive defense to come and coach us? And I didn't have it wasn't a long shot, right? So now, as we move on, good luck to him in Minnesota. I kind of seen him going back to Minnesota anyway if he didn't land a head coaching job. But hey, wishful thinking, right? I still got the people that I like. That's just that was my top pick. Brian Flores was the top of my list as far as defensive coordinators. I would have paid him whatever amount he wanted. I would have paid him like a head coach, gave him the assistant head coach title. I would have did whatever. But we didn't do that. We didn't get a chance at him. But it's not over. The search still continues on for who our defensive coordinator is going to be going into this 2026 season. And like I said, man, guys like a Brian Flores is what I envision as the defensive coordinator. I want for my Washington Commanders, for our Washington Commanders, y'all. The aggressive play calling that he has. Yes, you need the personnel to go with it. And we know the AP, DQ, and whoever this defensive coordinator is going to have a lot of work to do to overturn this bad play back-to-back years on on the defensive side of football. Don't have many dangling, pieces to hang out there in front of teams that may want to, trade for, guys on our team. You can say guys like maybe like Deron Payne and the unpopular take or player that I would throw out there, which a lot of people questioned what happened to him last year. But a guy like Frankie Louvu, if those two guys and you get phone calls for him, for one of those two guys or either both, do you pull the trigger now? Yes, that leaves us with two other holes that we need to fill on that defense. But you get more draft picks to get a lot younger. So that's the that's I mean, if that is an option, I'm listening to all phone calls. I was talking to my man on the phone, diehard Commanders fans as well. And like I said, nobody on this defense proved themselves to be a returning player. Everybody is an option. Everybody's an option. I know people gonna say Trey Amos played well. Yes, he did. Now I'm speaking at the very high level of what this defense, how bad this defense was. Nobody can raise their hand and say, "Oh, man, Slim, I'm definitely a return." Nah, Slim, I didn't see Trey Amos get ran over. I didn't see him, give up a flag, and right, we ain't gonna go down to too much into that. But Quan Martin may be gone. Will Harris didn't show us that much, and there was a lot of talk about the regression of a guy like Mike Sanders, who led the team in interceptions. There is a lot that needs to be done with this defense, and getting young is one of them. So if I'm looking at a 28-year-old Daron Payne and I get a phone call for a 4th round, 5th round pick for him, do you entertain it? Is this draft class that we're getting ready to head into deep enough to where you can replace a Daron Payne's production? That's a good question, right? Or does the defensive coordinator want to run it with, a Daron Payne? He wants to keep the D line intact, right? Minus adding a pass rusher that we desperately need. But that's another question for another day. So let's get into some of the names that has been, talked about and guys that we brought in for interviews. Joe Cullen, Chiefs defensive line coach. Of course, Brian Flores, Jonathan Gannon, ex Cardinals head coach. A lot of people have been talking about him, potentially being our DC. Patrick Graham, probably one of the first people that we brought in for a defensive coordinator interview and coordinator interview period, right? Al Harris, and these next two names is the top two names that is on my list as of right now. Al Harris, the Bears defensive passing game coordinator coach, for the Bears. Carl Scott, the Saints passing game and defensive back coordinator, and Denard Willis, ex-Titans defensive coordinator. Those are the names, and it has been reported that today, passing game coordinator Al Harris is interviewing for the Commanders defensive coordinator position per source. Jeremy Fowler, put out, I think he was the first person I seen put out the tweet that we want to bring him in for an interview. And if anybody remembers that when we hired Dan Quinn, he was the guy that, Dan Quinn spoke highly of him. They wanted to bring him in for an interview to be our defensive coordinator, but the Dallas Cowboys have been on some hating ass shit. This is why I don't like hiring coaches within, our division. I'm saying I'd rather hire outside of division, because then you can, potentially not have to run into that type of situation where we gotta not settle for a Joe Witt, but some could say we settle for Joe Witt. But Al Harris is now being linked to us to come in for an interview. And I'm gonna say this: I like him as, former player, now DB coach, coaching with Dan Quinn. And Dan Quinn, had a message, I guess, when he was, first on board and onto the Washington Commanders as the head coach, is that he liked the philosophy that Al Harris was preaching or speaking about. That's why he brought him onto the staff. Seeing how he helped turn guys like Deron Bland into an all-pro. Now there's some question marks how good Deron Bland truly is, but guys like Trayvon Diggs, he's helped turn cornerbacks into all-pro cornerbacks, and he's been able to coach these guys up to be top of the NFL and interceptions. Can he come in here and potentially shake off the bad juju, the bad play, the bad, teachings, and all of the things that went bad for us on the defensive side, and turn around a career of a Mike Sanders, who was our leading interception, guy for us this past season with 4. Now all the other guys got hurt, but hey, can he turn guys around like Trey? Can he take Trey Amos' game to the next level? And again, I'm not trying to compare, our cornerbacks to the Dallas Cowboys. I hate to do that, but you see what he was able to do from a DB coach perspective. Can he bring that in and call plays? He's never called defense before. So this would be another first-time defensive play caller that we will bring in. We already got David Bland. There has been talks throughout the media and some of the reporters that Washington don't want to bring in a inexperienced defensive coordinator. Now, those are reports, right? We don't know what Washington really want to do. Why bring a guy into an interview that you really not going, try to, bring in and make your defensive coordinator? He's very familiar with DQ. He knows DQ philosophy. He knows what type of defense he want to see on the field. He knows what type of production he wants out of his defense. So Al Harris' name is a top name for us right now. And not only him, Carl Scott, passing game coordinator and DB coach for the Seattle Seahawks. There's reports that Washington is trying to wait it out to see if the Seahawks make it to the Super Bowl or wait until they lose and then try to make that hire happen. But we got to see. And I like Carl Scott's philosophy when it comes to match zone. I like it. And that's another thing that DQ spoke about Al Harris when it came to, and I think that's where one of the areas we struggled at from a secondary perspective. Passing guys on. If you see a 2x2 and they lined up tight, not being able to, just pass on the inside receiver, pass them on to the outside guy. Sit and wait. Turn your back to the defense. Y'all bracketing these two receivers. If both go inside, guess what? Inside DB, you take the inside guy. Or if that outside guy runs underneath the inside receiver, you pick up the guy down and you let the DB on the outside pick him up. That's the philosophy that I want to see, along with the blitzing and being able to get pressure on a quarterback. But hey, we gotta see if that is a thing. We gotta see. Oh, my bad, Jeremy Fly. Also, Al Harris's interview for the Green Bay Packers defensive coordinator job today, per Adam Schefter. But is that match zone, that switch, philosophy, can a Carl Scott bring that into our environment and, we be able to have a better production from our secondary? But I know that also, requires us to address our pass rushing situation. But right now, looking at it, we got Al Harris coming in for an interview. We've already interviewed Carl Scott. Again, shout out to Rio Robinson. I heard him talk about it on his live, about a video about Carl Scott back at Alabama, just talking about the switching, the zone switching, philosophy, and how he breaks down, the mentality behind being able to switch off receivers in a defense, running cover full, running palms, primarily too high, single, being able to run that and show different variations of it, how to run it from a man perspective, how to run it from a zone perspective, how to pass off receivers if they run a certain formations from an offensive perspective, 2x3, 3x1, 3x2, 2x2, how to pass guys off, how to pick up that guy coming out the backfield, and just doing your job. I like what he was teaching. And I bought in. I'm like, damn, like this is the defense. That's the type of philosophy I want to be taught to our secondary, to our linebackers. Like that's what I want to see. But we are still searching for our defensive coordinator. Who would that be? We don't know. We don't know. We gotta just stay patient and wait for the news to drop. But I just had to come in here. I just had to come on here and talk about it a little bit, just give my thought process. Some of the one or two of the guys that I really like. If you had to make me rank, the guys that we have interviewed so far and is about to interview, Carl Scott, damn, it's like Carl Scott and Al Harris are like tied. They neck and neck for me. And then Jonathan Gannon is probably, the honorable mention. Like those are the three guys that I'm really looking at. Patrick Graham probably falls under that. Don't know much about him, but the league talks, favorably about him as the defensive coordinator. So Al Harris is coming in for an interview. We've already interviewed Carl Scott, Jonathan Gannon, Patrick Graham, and some other guys. Y'all let me know in the comments, man. Who do y'all think? Who would y'all want as our defensive coordinator? Is it the never called a defense or never been a defensive play caller? And Al Harris and Carl Scott. So those two guys, matter of fact, those are two guys that we got to consider. They got the right mentality, but they've never called a defensive game. Al Harris has played the game of football. Not sure about Carl Scott and his tenure, playing football and things like that. I don't know if he ever made it to the league. I didn't read that much into him, but Al Harris has played the game before, so he knows football. But can he call a game from a coaching perspective, not from a player? I mean, I guess you need both. But y'all let me know in the comments what you guys think, man. I'll catch y'all in the next one, baby. Raise Hill. I'm up out of here.